She was called the ice cream killer, and when you hear why, you'll never step foot in an ice cream shop again. It was 2008 in Vienna in Austria. Estibaliz Carranza, or Esti to her friends, was an old school romantic. She would spend her days dreaming about finally meeting the one and just driving off into the sunset together. So it seemed like her dreams had come true when she met this guy called Holger Holtz. And he was so serious about her that he actually wanted to get married, A, and B, own an ice cream shop together. They could run this small business and basically live happily ever after. So they got this quaint little ice cream shop and it was pretty successful. They'd always have queues out of the door. But something was irritating Esti. Her husband suddenly didn't want kids. And she was kind of like, well, I thought this was part of the deal. You said once we got married, we could start a family. She honestly felt a little bit tricked. She'd made it very clear all along that this was her intention. And they just started constantly arguing. They really just couldn't see eye to eye. And Holger stopped even helping in the ice cream shop and would just sit on his computer constantly. Esti was raging, so she decided to turn her attentions to another man. This was Manfred Hinterberger. She decided, actually, I don't want to be with my husband. I want to be with this new guy. But Holger was in her way. So one evening in 2008, she crept up behind him while he sat on his computer and shot him in the head. And I guess she didn't really plan what to do after she'd killed her husband, because she just stood there for a while thinking, okay, what do I do with his body now? She made a couple of attempts to cremate him, but it was a lot harder than it was in the movies. She decided to get creative. She was going to have to use the ice cream tubs from the shop. She cut off the limbs of her victim and stored them in those tubs. And if any customers asked her, oh, where is your husband today? She just explained it away by saying that he'd moved countries. They had no idea he was inside the shop with them, dismembered. But it's about to get a lot worse. After all of that, a little bit of time goes on and Esti starts to relax. She thinks, okay, I might have actually gotten away with this. And she figured her and her boyfriend, by this point, Manfred, could be together and start a family. But Manfred was like, no, I'm not actually ready. And to make matters worse, he said, I'm not even really ready to commit to you. I'm kind of dating other women. Bear in mind, she's mid to late 30s at this point, so in her mind, she was running out of time. This was now 2 years on from the first murder, so spoiler alert, there's another one coming. One evening, her anger just bubbled over while she was watching Manfred sleep in their bed. And you can probably guess what happened next. Suddenly, she fired 4 shots into his head. And by now she had a blueprint of what to do. She was going to dismember Manfred in the exact same way that she had with her husband. Chillingly, she used the noise from the ice cream making machines in the shop to cover up the sound of her chainsaw cutting off the limbs of her boyfriend. The customers waiting for their mint choc chip ice creams had no idea that was what's going on behind the scenes. But astonishingly, she got away with it again for a little bit of time. And you couldn't make this up. A couple of years went on and she had another new bloke, but this time she was pregnant. It seemed her dreams were finally coming true, and like I said, again, she started to relax and think she'd gotten away with it. It was like, finally, my dreams have come true, and it's only taken 2 cold-blooded murders to get there. But her time was running out. She got far too cocky and decided she was going to renovate the basement of the ice cream parlor. The basement where her 2 ex's dismembered bodies were stored. It just so happened that the poor workmen that were there to do the job stumbled upon those very same ice cream tubs and wondered why on earth they were so heavy. When Esti was arrested, she argued that both of the men were abusive to her and she had no other way out. But she was given life in prison, and while behind bars, finally gave birth to the baby boy she'd so desperately wanted, who is now being raised by his dad because she's in prison.
This man didn't just hunt animals, he hunted women like actual prey and made them run for their lives while he stood back and shot them down with a rifle. Welcome to the series, Serial Killers from Every State, and for Alaska, it's Robert Hansen, the Butcher Baker. He was born in 1939 and raised in Iowa, and his childhood was the kind that makes monsters. A brutal father, constant beating, severe acne, and a stutter that he just could not shake. And every girl he liked laughed in his face, so instead of dealing with it, he just grew a boiling hatred towards women. And instead of trying to fit in, he turned to hunting. Out there in the woods, all by himself, that's where he learned to stalk his prey, and eventually, his prey wasn't animals anymore. By his 20s, he was already dangerous, breaking laws for fun, burning down garages, even faced a grape accusation, but that just kind of disappeared. And by 1967, he tried to settle into a normal life. He married, had 2 kids, moved to Alaska, and opened up a bakery like he was just some regular family man. But that never truly satisfied him. That lingering feeling of rejection and control led him to build a secret life in the wilderness that nobody would discover until it was his personal graveyard. At night, he just cruised through his town looking for women who were struggling to survive. Dancers, sex workers, women he thought nobody would miss. He'd pull that fake nice guy routine, offer them a ride, a little cash, just enough to make their guard drop. But the second they got in that car, it was over. He'd force them onto his plane, fly them out to his remote cabin miles from anything, take their shoes off, setting them free into the wild and making them run, letting them think they had a chance to escape. And then he'd just watch as they tried to run barefoot through all the snow and ice before calmly picking up his rifle and ending their lives whenever he felt like it. And the scariest part is he loved it. The only reason we know this ever happened is because one girl managed to escape. June 13th, 1983, Cindy Paulson, he offered her money, took her back to his place, and that's when Cindy immediately realized she is in grave danger. Robert held her at gunpoint, chained her down in his basement, assaults her, and then just takes a nap next to her like nothing happened. The next day, he's loading his plane, ready to take her to his cabin. But while his back is turned, Cindy runs. Barefoot in cuffs, covered in bruises, she runs straight into traffic and throws herself in front of a truck. And thankfully, someone stopped. Because of her, the FBI steps in and rushes to his house, and what they find there is unreal. Hidden away, there's jewelry belonging to all the missing women and weapons, lots of them tucked away as if he's preparing for the apocalypse. And then they find a map, and on it, there's 37 little X's, each one marking a grave. But when they ask him about it, he just shrugs and says, "Oh, it's their fault. They made me do it." Like, I'm sorry, what? Robert Hansen confessed to taking the lives of 17 women, but everybody knows that number is much, much higher. Luckily, though, he died in prison in 2014, and may his soul never find peace. Let's remember, though, these aren't just scary stories, they're real people and real pain. If you're still here, thank you. You guys are my crime-solving besties. So just know, you're not only watching, you're the reason why these cases are still remembered. I love you guys. I will see you in my next video.
He saw the Columbine High School massacre and decided to do the exact same thing. It was late March 2021 in Waller, Texas. Trey Sesler lived in the area with his parents, Rhonda and Lawton, and his brother Mark. And from the outside looking in, they looked like a totally normal family that you would expect to see in America. But something evil was brewing under the surface. Now, Trey was an incredibly disturbed child, and no one really knew why, which really scares me because you just never know when somebody evil is lurking inside of your own family. Trey concocted a very bizarre and dangerous plan when he was only 13. He decided he wanted to unalive his friend, so he was going to lure a police officer to his home, steal the G off the police officer, and then use that for his plan. He made a bogus call to the police and got them to arrive at his house, but his plan went totally wrong. He was waiting with a baseball bat. He was going to attack the police officer, but when the police officer arrived and saw him waiting with the bat, he was like, this guy needs a psychiatric assessment. He was then referred for his mental health, but frustratingly nothing ever came from that. Trey turned his attention towards YouTube and called himself Mr. Anime. He'd post these kind of Disney Channel style skits with canned laughter over the top, and at the start they seemed pretty good. But as he posted more and more, his followers noticed that his content was going from harmless to really dark. And trigger warning here, he became obsessed with weapons and started using his own pets for target practice. And his behavior was just causing his relationships with his parents and his brother to just deteriorate. He started drinking heavily and he was just not a nice person to be around. It felt like his obsessions were turning darker and darker until he turned his attention towards the Columbine killings. And sickeningly, instead of being absolutely disturbed by the tragedy, he was inspired. He wanted to recreate it for himself. By this point, he was 22 and he had a target in mind, his old high school, which was Waller High School. So he started concocting his own Columbine, essentially, and downloaded a satellite image of the high school. He wanted to do maximum damage. He planned to ram the gate of the school and then just unleash hell on as many students as he possibly could. But he had one slight issue in his mind. His family were in the way. He didn't want to do all of this and have his family have to live through it. That was his logic. So he was going to take them down too. Now, bizarrely, just before he put his sick plan in motion, he uploaded a strange video to YouTube, basically explaining to his followers that he'd got headhunted and had a really good new job opportunity. It was actually a total lie. He didn't get headhunted, and I don't know what you guys think, because I keep going back and forth in my mind thinking, did he really believe this? Like, was he having delusions? But it would be the last video he'd ever post. On the 18th of March 2012, he lured his mum to the garage of their home. Catching her totally unaware, he just shot her in the face. Horrifically, he then calmly walked up the stairs of his home to where his brother was. He then shot his brother too, but miraculously, his brother managed to survive and run to the bathroom and bolt himself inside. I can't imagine how terrifying that must have been. Trey then started bashing the door in to try and get to his brother to murder him. He shot his injured brother once again, and this time it was fatal. Now, the absolute chaos woke up Trey's dad, who'd just been peacefully asleep in his bedroom. He came out thinking, what the hell is going on? Is some armed intruder in our house? It was only when his own son fired his weapon at him that he realized the terror had come from inside the family. Again, it was a fatal blow. With now 3 dead bodies inside of the home, Trey weirdly started scribbling on the walls and the doors in black marker pen. Things like, I will never forgive myself, I don't know why I did this, God help me. He then totally trashed the place and finally horrifically killed every single pet the family owned. Now, later that day, a family member called police. They were like, it's very odd, we can't actually get hold of anybody in that household. Could you just go over and check, do a quick welfare check? And when officers peered through the window of the home, they couldn't believe their eyes. And this family massacre absolutely stunned the community. But what about the high school? Well, Trey had loaded his car up and then driven to the high school and sat in wait. But he didn't do it. And many people wonder why. He would later say that it just felt too real. I don't know how that feels too real, but killing your whole family doesn't. So many people go back and forth on like what actually stopped him from doing it. Now, thankfully, he was eventually found hiding out at his friend's house and was arrested before he could take any more lives. The country was saved from another school shooting, but essentially the family paid the price. He was given life without parole in prison.
He stuck his hand in the skull and mixed up the brains. He said it felt like putty, the consistency of the brain tissue. He then also said something about how he also tasted the brain. Guys, massive graphic content warning, even for me. And you know the kind of cases that I talk about. I was like, am I even allowed to say half of these things? All of these things actually on this app. The details of this crime are truly unspeakable. All I'm going to say is if you're eating, you better stop. It was around 10 a.m. on a Thursday in March of 2014 in Corpus Christi when 911 received a call. 911, what is the location of your emergency? Yes, ma'am. Someone just knocked on my door. He's at my door right now and he wanted me to call 911 because he said that he just murdered someone. The woman passes the phone to 18-year-old Kevin Jezreel Davis. Hello? Oh, as I've said, I've just murdered someone actually. At the same time, at a different residence, officers have shown up to conduct a requested wellness check on 50-year-old Kimberly Hill. Officers arrived to the apartment that she shared with her 18-year-old son Kevin and his sister Desiree Hill. When they get there, the front door is locked, so they have to get a key from the maintenance staff. They enter the apartment. Immediately their attention goes to all of the red liquid on the carpet. There's a lot of it in a trail leading to the hallway and into the bedroom, and there was 50-year-old Kimberly Hill. She was very clearly deceased, a pool of red around her and a hammer lying on the carpet next to her. It was more than clear what the hammer had been used for because Kimberly had a gaping wound in the back of her head. Officers look around her and there's brain matter scattered around the floor. It is a crime scene out of your worst nightmare. They keep walking around and they find written notes left behind by whoever did this to Kimberly. One of them reads, quote, "Sorry for the mess, signed KD." The night prior, March 26th of 2014, sometime between 7 and 9 p.m., 50-year-old Kimberly had taken her last breath in the arms of her son, Kevin Jezreel Davis. Kevin had had dark thoughts his entire life. He always knew that he was different because the things that he fantasized about were unalived bodies, specifically having intimate relations with someone or something that was deceased. This is a quote from him, quote, "I don't have standards or morals. A body is a body," end quote. And Kevin would dream of the perfect murder and what he describes to be, quote, "all of the colorful details," end quote. However, those thoughts are thoughts that he would keep to himself. Other thoughts, like the fact that he was bored with his life and hated people and wanted to remove himself from this world because of it, those kind of thoughts he would share with people, specifically with his mother Kimberly, and one day he asked her for permission to remove himself from this world. To which his mother said, "If that's what you want to do, then I can't really do anything about it because you're an adult and you're more than capable of making your own decisions." But Kevin didn't really like that answer, so he decided that he was going to change his plans around, and instead of himself, he was going to murder his mother and his sister. That Wednesday night, as his mom sat on the couch watching TV, Kevin approached her from behind with a cord from a video game controller in an attempt to wrap it around her. But Kimberly fought back. She started screaming, which is when Kevin ran to go and find something else to use, which is when he grabbed that hammer. He then used that on his mom about 20 times, the bones in the skull broken, but Kevin claimed that she was still alive. So he ran to the kitchen and grabbed He then used that to go inside of the skull to, in his words, by the way, quote, "stir up her brains," end quote. But he said that it wasn't really working, so then he used his hands. When Kimberly was gone, he dragged her body into the master bedroom where Kevin SA'd her. Afterwards, he waited for his sister to come home, but she never did. He then took a bath, cleaned himself off, changed clothes, and then he wrote multiple notes, one stating that he had intentions to do to his sister the same thing that he had just done to his mom, but said he couldn't because she never came home. He then hopped on his bike and rode around town aimlessly all night long with no final destination, riding his bike on train tracks off of a highway. He eventually ditched his bike and started walking around all throughout the night and into the next morning. He thought about going on the run, but I think that he realized that that was never going to work, so he decided that he was just going to turn himself in. He walked up to the first house that he saw with an open door. He knocked on the door, and when the middle-aged couple answered, he asked them to call 911 because he had just murdered his own mother. He was arrested, of course, and not even for 1 second did he try to lie about anything. He fully confessed, and that interrogation is probably the one that has made me the most uncomfortable that I have ever been to date. I had to take so many breaks and step outside, go breathe fresh air and touch grass before continuing on and watching the whole thing because I was just like, ugh. It's awful, but he confessed fully. He told officers everything that he did, and his body language when he's explaining the details of his crime, it's like he's just talking about the weather. How calm and relaxed he seems to be is terrifying. He's even smiling and laughing at times and calling some of the things that he did silly. He then told them, because he wanted to be honest with them, that if he had not been arrested, he definitely would have done the same thing again because, quote, he still had the urge to kill, end quote. Investigators asked him what his mom did to deserve what he did to her, and he said, quote, "absolutely nothing. I'm just a terrible, disgusting person," end quote. He talks about his dark thoughts and how he's always had them, and they ask him if he thinks that he's ever been mentally ill or insane or if he's ever thought about getting help, and he just says, no, it just is what it is. When his sister was brought into the station and she was made aware of what had happened, she was shocked, horrified, devastated. Later on in court, she says that she felt like her entire world had collapsed. She says that she never could have imagined that her brother could be capable of such violence, and that finding out left her feeling deeply betrayed, angry, and heartbroken. She also told the jury that she would never, ever, ever be able to forgive her brother for what he did, which I do not blame her. Kevin Davis pleaded guilty to ending the life of his mother, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. It's so hard for me to comprehend that a human being is capable of doing things like that. It's insanity. Anyway, that is all I have for this case. Thank you for spending time with me today. Also, guys, a new episode on the podcast dropped yesterday, so go listen to that if you haven't. I hope you're having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.
This might be the scariest cult I've ever heard of. And what makes this cult so different from other cults is that the cult leader was actually a woman. And she actually believed that she was Jesus Christ reincarnated. And with Anne Hamilton Burns' cult, The Family, she stole 28 babies. Yep, this is a baby stealing cult. And it's also the most infamous cult in all of Australia. and she was able to get away with all of it. We know very little about Anne's upbringing and her childhood, but what we do know is that she was the oldest of 7 children. She was raised without a father present in her life, and her mother was a paranoid schizophrenic who believed that she was a psychic medium and was sadly in and out of psychiatric hospitals for most of her life. When Anne was in her early 20s, she became obsessed with the idea of having the perfect family. That's where like the cult name comes into play. She wanted tons of children, a lot of money. She was very vain, and image meant everything to her. She ended up getting married and having one biological child with her husband, but her and her husband had plans on adopting a baby, and you won't believe it, like get this, the day that she was meant to go pick up her baby with her husband got in a car accident on the way to the adoption agency and died. And then the adoption agency pulled out of the adoption because it was like the 1940s, 1950s. Anne was now a single mother. So Anne lost her husband and her new baby all in one day. In the 1960s is when Anne's cult began, and it actually started as a yoga class. Like, I'm being dead ass. Anne got really into yoga and started teaching her own yoga class. All these wealthy women would attend Anne's yoga class, and they became obsessed with her. Anne would tell these women that she was a psychic medium, that she was a psychic healer, that she had all of these spiritual abilities, that she was practically immoral, and of course that she was Jesus Christ himself reincarnated. And the longer that this yoga class went on, the less it became about yoga and it became a cult. It was all about Anne and Anne's powers and her preaching about her spiritual abilities. And Anne had so much control over these women, so much in fact that she was able to convince them to leave their husbands and come join her family, which in the 1960s was very rare for a woman to leave her husband. But Anne wanted more members of her cult that, had power and influence in society, and in the 1960s, that was men. The first man to join Anne's cult was a very intelligent man. He was a doctor. He had a lot of influence, a lot of powerful connections, but he was also very gullible. His name was Dr. Johnson, and he truly 100% believed in Anne's spiritual powers and psychic abilities and the fact that she was Jesus Christ. And he was the one that was actually able to get all of these men to join Anne's cult. And these men, weren't schmucks. They were doctors, they were lawyers, they were politicians, they were very wealthy and very powerful and very influential. And the original name of Anne's cult was, get this, the Great White Brotherhood, but they later changed the name to the Family. And the initiation ceremony into Anne's cult was literally terrifying. New members would be dosed with a large amount of psychedelics, and then they were put in a dark room for hours just by themselves while they're, tripping. And then Anne would appear. Anne would appear wearing long white robes with a single spotlight on her, and there'd be like smoke machine filling the dark room with all of this mist. And then Anne would, appear and introduce herself as Jesus Christ, and the members believed all of it. But probably the scariest part about Anne's cult is when she became the owner of her very own psychiatric hospital. One of Anne's members actually was the original owner of the psychiatric hospital, but when they passed away, they left it to Anne in their will. And what Anne was able to do with a psychiatric hospital is something straight out of my nightmares. Apparently, at this time in Australia, anyone could be committed to a psychiatric hospital against their will as long as 2 doctors signed off on it. And since Anne had complete control over all of these doctors, she could have anyone she wanted committed. Anyone that disagreed with her, got in her way, or tried to leave her cult. And these people would be tortured. They would get treatment, unnecessary treatment that they did not need. They would be put under like surgery and procedures, and sometimes even given frontal lobe lobotomies, literally drilled into their head just for getting in Anne's way. At one point, Anne falls in love with this man named Bill, and Bill was already married and had 4 children. But what does Anne do? She gets Bill's wife committed to the psychiatric hospital against her will, even though nothing was wrong with her. Nothing was, wrong with her mental health or anything. And then was able to convince Bill to leave his wife, abandon his children, and then just marry Anne instead and join her family. And at this point, Anne's cult has grown a lot. It has over 500 members, and they're all incredibly wealthy. She was able to convince these people that she had complete control over to give her 10% of their yearly salary every single year. So 10% of 500 wealthy people's salary, and it made Anne a multi-millionaire. She bought houses all over the world, these big, beautiful mansions. She was traveling to the most beautiful places in the world, but she still was not happy. She wanted children. And this is the part of the story where Anne steals 28 babies. If a pregnant woman or a pregnant teenager was ever committed to Anne's hospital, sometimes committed, by force by Anne herself, she would have the doctors that she had control over deem the mother as unfit, and then once the woman, gave birth to a baby, she would have the doctors steal the baby and hand it over to Anne. And there was nothing that these women could do to stop Anne, but Anne did not stop there. When one of her cult members got pregnant, she would claim the baby as hers and steal their babies as well. And then she raised all 28 of these children as her own biological children. And you would hope with all the effort that Anne has gone through to steal all of these children that she would at least love them and take care of them, but you would be very wrong. These children from birth, I'm literally talking about newborns, were being tortured, abused, starved, and as young as 8 years old, Anne would have these children be by force to take a lot of psychedelic drugs, literally 8 years old, on LSD. And Anne would rarely ever hurt the children with her own hands. She always kept her hands clean. She would have the other women cult members be the ones to hurt the children, and because she's so messed up and sick and twisted, she would often have the actual biological mothers abuse their own biological children. But it was all like discipline in Anne's eyes. The children and the literal newborns just had to be disciplined. By now, the cult has been operating for like 30 years, and the local people in the area are completely aware that there's a cult in their town, and then the media catches wind, and then the media is asking all these questions to Anne and the other cult members about what the heck is going on with the family. And at this point, it's the late 80s. Anne is in her 60s. The pressure starts to get to her, so she decides to just ditch Australia for a little bit and go spend some time at one of her many mansions that she has across the entire world until things start to blow over and die down. But with Anne gone, some of the older children begin to rebel, specifically the two oldest girls who were like 16 and 17 years old. They began sneaking out of the family compound, sneaking into town. They see, what the real world is actually like. Imagine jumping straight into the 80s when you're being raised like, the children of the frickin' corn this entire time. They start stealing food for some of the younger children because these children have been starved their entire life. They're so malnourished that some of them were unable to even walk. And then at one point, the two older girls just have enough and they go to the police and they just tell them everything. The police come to the family is raided, cult members are being arrested, some of them are losing their jobs, like these really influential politicians, lawyers, doctors are losing their jobs, or their reputations were ruined forever. Anne's hospital that she had was finally shut down, and the people that she's pretty much had held a prisoner for years were finally released. Sadly, it took a really, really long time for them to even find Anne because she was just on the run. But when they did find her, they brought her back to Australia and then she was put on trial. But this is going to upset you guys so much because Anne always had her other cult members do all of the the things that were illegal. They could only charge her with 3 counts of fraud for forging 3 birth certificates of the children that she stole, and she got no prison time. She was fined. This multi-millionaire who's been a cult leader for 30 years, stole 28 babies, abused them, had all these people committed, were forcefully ordering frontal lobe lobotomies, and also has all these mansions because she's a multi-millionaire. They fined her only $5,000. And then she was free to go. I start to get heated when I start to tell you guys a case, when I start stumbling over my words and I'm just like, word vomiting all over the place. But with Anne's trial now over, guess what she does? She goes right back to being a cult leader. Yep, the cult continued after all of this. Anne never apologized. She never showed any remorse for any of the things that she ever did. She never even admitted to doing anything wrong. And she went on to live a very long, happy life as a multimillionaire cult leader with all of these mansions across the entire world until she died at 98 years old. I don't know a ton about what happened to the children. I do know they were freed and somehow were able to be raised together. They raised them all together in like a group home, which is really nice. But sadly, a lot of them had lifelong health issues and or lifelong trauma. And sadly, a lot of them ended up passing away very, very young. And if you're wondering what happened to the family cult after Anne died, well, it's still active today. Anne left all of her multi-million dollars to all of her members, and the cult is still active in a very tiny town outside of Melbourne, Australia. So if you live there or know anyone that lives there or plan on vacationing to Australia, just know that. Be aware of that. Alright, well that is this terrifying case. I don't think I've ever really talked about cults before, but they're super interesting, and maybe we'll dive a little bit deeper into some more cults. If there's one that you guys want me to talk about, let me know in the comments. I'm so sorry that I've been MIA for a couple days. I've had like the worst cold I've ever had in my entire life. I've been so sick, but I think there's something going wrong. So if you guys are also sick, let me know, but I'm starting to feel a little bit better, so I will be back tomorrow with another video, and I love you guys so much, and I will see you tomorrow.
She disappeared after running away from her apartment barefoot in a rainstorm, only to be found 2 months later under bizarre circumstances. This is the disturbing case of Kaylin Louder. Kaylin was a 30-year-old social worker who lived with a roommate in a condo in Murray, Utah. Her family described her as being the most non-judgmental person ever and was a true friend to everyone. And she loved animals, especially her pug Phyllis. September 27th, 2014 was a day like any other. Kaylin had called her mom like usual and was cleaning her house and working on her resume, as she had been recently let go from her job at a private boys' school. But just the night before and earlier that day, Kaylin had called 911 a couple of times thinking that someone had broken into her house. In the 911 call, which I'll play shortly, you can hear her roommate, who is also home, and she's questioning what Kaylin is saying. Although Kaylin is adamant that someone is in their house even though she can't see them and can only hear them, the roommate says that the deadbolt is still locked and that it would be impossible for someone to have broken in.
They're stealing from my house. Get out of my house. Shut up.
Are they saying anything?
Yeah, I heard someone say, hey, go in there, so there's obviously 2 of them. Don't do that, Kelsey. The door's still locked. It's impossible. They must have a key or something. Why is the door still locked? Well, I can't explain that, but I heard like 2 people talking.
The Murray Police Department responded to the call but found no evidence of a break-in. At around 7 p.m., Kaylin is caught on her condo's security footage walking her dog Phyllis for hours. She is alone except for her dog, but is having a conversation. What was said is unknown. After letting Phyllis back inside, Kaylin is then seen walking away from her apartment in only a tank top and shorts, and she had no shoes on. This is especially odd considering this was all happening during a massive rainstorm, so she was getting soaked and must have been really cold. This is the last known footage of her before she completely disappeared. A massive search was launched, but it seems like Murray PD didn't take the case too seriously and kind of painted Kaylin in a bad light, saying she was acting delusional, having an animated conversation with herself. You get the picture. Kind of making it seem like she left on her own free will under a delusional state. They basically said there wasn't much they could do since she was an adult, and that was that. And there would be no updates in this case until 2 months later. On December 1st, West Valley City work crews were inspecting a drainage pipe at the Jordan River, near 3300 South and 1200 West. They spotted something barely sticking out of the water in the middle of the river underneath a bridge. And when they looked closer, they found that it was a body that was partially covered by plants. Okay, go to part 2. This is part 2 of the disturbing case of Kaylin Louder. When police arrived to the scene, they found that the body was severely decomposed. So at first, they didn't know the age or even the gender of this person. But after an autopsy was performed, authorities found that the body belonged to Kaylin. But because of how decomposed she was, they were unable to determine a cause of death. Murray PD said that there was no evidence to suggest foul play. So as of today, her manner of death remains undetermined 10 years later. But there are so many things that don't add up in this case and her mysterious disappearance, like how exactly she ended up in the Jordan River. Where she was found was approximately 6 miles away from her condo in Murray. So there are grates surrounding the river near her apartment, making it nearly impossible to just fall in. And she would have had to walk or run really far to end up where she did. Another thing that has never really been explained was her behavior the day she went missing. Kaylin had no history of mental illness, but her walking around outside in the pouring rain and calling 911 like she did was out of character for her, according to her family. She left behind her phone, keys, purse, and most importantly, Phyllis. So it just doesn't make sense how or why she ended up in the river. There have been a couple of theories as to what could have happened to Kaylin. One theory being that she died in her condo that night and was moved to the Jordan River after the fact. But from everything that I can find, there is no footage of her re-entering her condo after walking away that day. Another theory comes from a user in the Facebook group dedicated to Kaylin. I'm gonna blur out this user's name and picture because I don't want to put her on blast. But basically, she left a comment stating that a man who was being investigated in the disappearance and death of Kaylin had also held her, this user, against her will and had almost killed her. This man, who has never been publicly identified, reportedly moved to California after being interrogated and has a violent history. This user states that he even owned a condo in the same building as Kaylin. But what's odd is that while Kaylin was still missing, he hung a giant banner with her information on it at one of his properties in Clearfield, Utah. He claimed to have never met Kaylin but wanted to help find her. But it's just odd because Clearfield is about 40 miles away from where she disappeared. So I don't know how much that would have helped, and to insert yourself like that, it's just kind of giving a weird vibe. This user also goes on to say that this man owned another house about a half-mile from where Kaylin's body was found. So the whole thing is just bizarre. Like I said, this man has never been publicly identified, but he apparently has a violent history and comes from a lot of money. It's now been 10 years, and whatever happened to Kaylin remains a mystery. Her family believes that there is more to the story and that her death was not an accident. If you have any information about this case, please contact the number on the screen.
She did something so evil and disturbing in the bathroom at her prom and then went right back to dancing like nothing had happened. It was summer 1997 in beautiful Forked River, New Jersey. Melissa Drexler seemed like a very normal high school student. She was born into a middle-class family and she did pretty well at school, and she was getting very excited for the school prom. She went to Lacey Township High School and really wanted to ultimately go into a career in fashion. That was really what she was passionate about. And she was actually dating a guy called John Lewis. No, not that John Lewis, but a John Lewis that went to her school. And apparently they'd had a bit of a pregnancy scare. Now, this was very worrying considering A, she was actually from a very strict Catholic family, and B, she was only 18. But apparently her and John had had a conversation. It got kind of ironed out. It was, a false alarm and everything was fine as far as John knew. So on the 6th of June, Melissa was super excited getting ready for her school prom. Massive occasion. Everybody was so looking forward to it. And Melissa and John decided to kind of like double date in a car with another couple and drive to prom together. During the ride, Melissa's friend looked over at Melissa and noticed that she was screwing her face up and clutching her stomach. It looked like she had bad cramps. So the friend looked over and she's like, "Is Melissa okay? Maybe she's just nervous for the big occasion." No one had any idea she was in active labor. So as soon as the couples got to the prom, Melissa raced straight to the bathroom and everyone kind of assumed maybe she just really needs the toilet. But she was in there ages, and Melissa's friend and her boyfriend kind of didn't want to embarrass Melissa and like go in and make a big scene, but they also thought maybe she needs help. Melissa's friend quietly opened the bathroom door and was like, "Melissa, are you okay? Do you need anything?" But she reassured her, "Don't worry, tell the boys I'll be right out." But under the door, Melissa's friend thought that she could see what looked like blood. So she presumed what probably all of us girls would presume, she's just having women's problems. I mean, why would she assume anything more sinister than that? Melissa didn't look pregnant. Obviously, massive trigger warning here. What Melissa did next is barbaric. She gave birth to her child into the toilet bowl, broke off part of the sanitary bin to use as a knife. She cut the umbilical cord and then suffocated the child. She then shoved her baby boy in a plastic bag and placed him in the bin. As if nothing had happened, she miraculously just appeared from the toilet, grabbed a bite to eat from the salad bar, and just started dancing with people on the dance floor. It wasn't until a teacher entered the toilet and thought, "Why are there loads of paper towels everywhere? Why does it look like there's been blood on the toilet?" that the true horror started to unfold. The teacher called in another member of staff and was like, "Look, I just feel like this is really strange. Something weird's happened here." And they tried looking in the bin, but they couldn't really see what was in the bin, and when they lifted it, they realized it was so heavy. When they eventually dug through and realized what had been disposed of inside that bin, they just fell to their knees. Sadly, even though the emergency services raced over there to try and save this child's life, paramedics could not resuscitate the baby boy. Now, obviously, while all this was going on, Melissa's friend noticed the commotion and she was like, well, Melissa was the one that was in there for ages before, over half an hour. She reported Melissa's strange behaviour, thankfully, and Melissa was kind of backed into a corner and had to admit that the baby was hers. Melissa tried to argue that the baby had actually been born deceased because it had the umbilical cord wrapped around its neck, but the medical examiner found it really difficult to either prove or disprove that. She was nicknamed Prom Mum by the media, and it will probably infuriate you, because it infuriated me, to hear that Melissa got a plea deal and was given 15 years, but was freed on parole after just 3.
They call her the female Charles Manson. Sherry Brooks and her baby-stealing cult family. This is a very sick, twisted, disturbing, heartbreaking case, and Sherry might be the most evil woman we've ever talked about. This woman is a monster. Sherry's childhood was a disaster. Her father began to essay her when she was only a baby and gave her the nickname Sugar Babe. Already off to a really sick start, and her mother knew about it and just didn't do anything. Sherry was removed from her parents' care at age 3 and then was in foster care for 13 years. And it was while she was in foster care at the age of 16 that she tried to steal one of her foster siblings' babies. She was unsuccessful, but this was the beginning of Sherry's odd behavior towards babies, but it was not the end. Honestly, Sherry and her entire family are just weird. When Sherry was 18, she began dating her literal cousin, and the family knew about it. They approved of the relationship and would even call them the kissing cousins.
Oh yeah, they call us the kissing cousins.
And with her cousin, Sherry falls pregnant for the first time and gave birth to a son, but the cycle of abuse continued with Sherry, and she began to essay her son, her infant son, just like her father had done to her. The authorities did find out about this, and they removed Sherry's son from her care, but they never gave her any jail time. She never was put on the offender list. In this case, the system fails time and time again. Sherry then ditches her cousin. She gets a new man, and she was actually married to this man within weeks of them meeting. She gets pregnant again. She has another son, and the home that her and her child are living in is disgusting. Her son is being abused and neglected, so the child is removed from her custody again. She then gets pregnant for a third time, and the same thing happens. Within months of the baby being born, it's removed from Sherry's custody. It's honestly so disturbing to me that she can be caught essaying one of her babies, and her children are not being removed from her custody the second they're being born. Honestly, I'm gonna start sounding like a broken record, but Sherry gets pregnant again for a 4th time, but this time it was her first daughter, and it seemed like this time with Sherry's daughter, she was trying to be a better mom, but that was not the case. The reason that she was giving her daughter more attention was because she was also essaying her infant daughter, and she didn't want anyone to find out about it, but they did, and this child was taken from her care as well. And then Sherry gets pregnant for a 5th time. It's another girl, and this is her 5th pregnancy in 6 years. She's only 24 years old, by the way, but same thing happens again. Within 6 months of this baby being born, it was also removed from her custody. Sherry had a really weird obsession with girls and wanting daughters, so after her 2 daughters are taken from her custody, Sherry decides that she'll just kidnap herself a daughter. Her neighbor had actually just given birth to a little baby girl named Vera. Sherry becomes obsessed with Vera. She pretty much decides that Vera is just her daughter. She starts hanging around all the time and actually tries to kidnap her, but she was unsuccessful. But remember Vera, remember this child, because she will be very important in today's case. Sherry finds a new man. She has 4 more children with him. All of them were sons. So at this point, she has had 9 children, 5 of which were taken out of her custody for abuse and neglect, and at least 2 of those we know for 100% certainty was SA, and then she has 4 more children, and she's just able to keep them in her custody. And this is where Sherry Brooks's cult family begins. Because as her sons grew into teenagers, Sherry began to allow even more people to live with her in the home, and Sherry had complete control over all of these people. She was able to pressure anyone in her world to do exactly what she wanted. Despite being disgusting and evil and a monster, she was apparently quite manipulative and charming.
They call us the kissing cousins.
I don't see it, but let's continue. Sherry still had this obsession with wanting a daughter, having a little baby girl, so she began to force her teenage sons to get her a baby. And she did this by forcing her teenage sons, who were between the ages of 13 and 16 years old, to pretty much just sleep with teenage girls to get them pregnant. 2 of these girls did end up getting pregnant. The first one had a son, which Sherry had no interest in taking. She had 4 sons. She wanted a daughter. And the other girl had a miscarriage. So Sherry decided that she was going to find someone for her 13-year-old son, Zach, to impregnate. And if at this point you guys are like, this is really, really gross for me to hear, just know it's 10 times worse for me to have to say out loud. So Sherry picks a 19-year-old woman to be with her 13-year-old son. Yep, and it's even crazier because that woman was Vera, the baby that Sherry tried to kidnap so many years earlier. So let's take a quick pause to talk about Vera Jo Regal for a moment. So she was born with intellectual disabilities and as an adult was said to have the mind of an 8 to 12-year-old, and at 11 years old she was repeatedly essayed by her own father, which landed him 20 years in prison. So when Sherry reconnects with Vera and offers Vera to come live with her and her family, Vera is excited and she accepts. She's finally gonna have this big family that she's always wanted, but Vera had no idea that Sherry's real motives were for Vera to be with Sherry's adolescent son, get pregnant with a baby that Sherry was planning on stealing. So Vera moves in with the family. She's there for a couple years, and then when Zachary is 16 and Vera was 22, Sherry forces the two of them to sleep together, which did result in a pregnancy with a little baby girl. At first, Sherry treated Vera very, very well up until Vera gave birth. Then from there, she completely cut off Vera from the outside world and eventually cut off Vera from even seeing her own child because in Sherry's mind, that child was hers. And this is so messed up, but Sherry actually named Vera's daughter after Vera's father, the man that essayed her repeatedly when she was 11 years old just to psychologically torture Vera. And then the torture became physical. I'm not even kidding. If you can think about the worst things you can do to a person, it was probably happening to Vera. At this point, Sherry had about a dozen people living in her house and she had complete control over all of them, and all of them were encouraged to take part in the torture, the beatings, and the SA of Vera daily. And authorities were made aware of the terrible things that were happening in this house of horrors. They knew that a mentally disabled adult was being abused and also that a baby was being raised in these terrible, disgusting conditions, and really nothing was done. Vera was also being starved, like insanely starved. She was getting no food, and one day she ate something that she wasn't supposed to. So Sherry decided that she had to die. Sherry actually ordered two of the people that were living in her house to do it, a 21-year-old named Danny and his 17-year-old girlfriend named Nicole. And both of them were eager to kill Vera because both of them are so sick, twisted, evil individuals. On March 26, 2011, Danny and Nicole lured Vera out of the house. It was the first time she left that house in years, and I'm pretty sure she knew what was going to happen to her. They lured her to a nearby train track where they viciously both attacked her with sharp objects before just leaving her on the train tracks. And when a train eventually did come by, the conductor notified the police that there was a body on the train tracks, and the police officers immediately recognized Vera, knew that she was living with Sherry Brooks because they had come to the Brooks household so many times before. At first, Sherry tried to play dumb, but later Danny and Nicole both made a full confession and did say that Sherry was the one that ordered them to do it. Danny was sentenced to 40 years to life in prison, and his 17-year-old girlfriend received 23 years in prison, so she will be out when she's around 40 years old, just free to live in society. And if you're wondering if the other people in the house, but especially Sherry, got any charges for what happened, you know, maybe even conspiracy or accessory to murder charges, you would be dead wrong, because only a handful of people in the house got obstruction of justice charges, which got them anywhere from 30 days in prison to 5 years in prison. And Sherry pretty much walked away with no legal repercussions. It's the biggest FU ever because Sherry committed the worst crimes, the most vile crimes in the entire book, and got away with all of them. And Vera's daughter was adopted by a very, very nice family. She's about 14 years old now, and she sleeps every single night next to a photo of her mother, Vera. This case is so wild. It almost felt like I was telling you the plot of a movie because I cannot believe that there's people like this out there and that they can just get away with all the awful things they do. If you watched the end of this video, thank you so much. I love you guys so much, and I will see you guys tomorrow.
She was the daughter of a multi-millionaire. She could have had anything that she wanted, but instead she decided to write her own murder manual and viciously kill a vulnerable victim. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the murder of Anne Mendel. Today's case takes place in Golders Green, London, where 85-year-old Anne was living with her husband Leonard. On the 14th of March 2005, Leonard left their home on Elmcroft Crescent to pop to the estate agents. He and Anne were about to be going to Israel to visit their daughter, and he needed to go and collect their plane tickets. Leonard left the house shortly before 10 a.m, and by the time he arrived back home, just over an hour later, he would walk into a horrific scene. The hallway of their home was covered in blood, and lay at the bottom of the stairs was this pile of coats, and underneath those coats was the body of Anne lay in a pool of her own blood. In a panic, Leonard grabbed the phone in the hallway and tried to call emergency services, only to discover that the phone line had been cut. He then raced into the kitchen, where thankfully the phone inside of there was still working, and he was able to call 999. Despite the best efforts of Leonard giving mouth to Anne, she would be pronounced dead at 11:30 a.m. Her death was determined to have been caused from 14 stab wounds that she had sustained in her chest. Investigators at the crime scene determined that there was no sign of forced entry, meaning that it was likely that Anne had allowed her killer into the home. This made investigators think, did she know her killer? As always, initially suspicions fell on Leonard, on the husband. However, he was very quickly ruled out as a suspect. During her post-mortem, a tiny piece of skin was recovered from underneath one of Anne's fingernails, and a full DNA profile was able to be extracted from this tiny bit of skin. Officers held their breath as this DNA sample was uploaded to the national database, hoping and praying that they got a match and that they would be given the name of Anne's killer, and miraculously, they got one. The DNA belonged to 16-year-old Kemi Adeola. Kemi was the daughter of a very successful businessman who worked within real estate, who was worth millions. Raised inside of a Christian household, Kemi was privately educated and all round had a pretty good life. When she was 11, however, her parents separated, and when her mum left, her mum took Kemi with her. This meant that she lost touch with her dad. He would describe Kemi in her childhood as being kind and loving. However, as she grew older into her teenage years, she turned into a complete different person. Kemi became very angry, violent. On one occasion, she actually assaulted one of her neighbours. She would get into trouble for antisocial behaviour, and in fact, she spent a quarter of a year inside of a young offenders institute at Bellwood Hall prison for shoplifting offences. It was while here that she would write what has been described as the murder manual. Within the 18-page long manual, Kemi describes in detail her plan to murder and rob elderly women in order to steal their money from them. She even wrote down that she wanted to nick a minimum of £3 million. She had written down a list of items that she needed in order to do these crimes, what we would call a murder kit. These items included a butcher's knife, handcuffs, a stun gun, and drugs. She wrote how she intended to creep up behind these elderly women and put her gloved hand over their mouths before scaring them into submission and silence. She would then torture them up until they gave over their bank details and the codes to their safes. One quote taken from the murder manual read in part, quote, "With your butcher's knife, remove her head, wrap it in film to contain bleeding, detach limbs one by one. When you have completed the task, put head, body pieces in a black bag." During the investigation, officers were able to determine a connection between the two women. Anne and Kemi had actually once been neighbours, and on at least one occasion, Anne had opened her home up to Kemi, allowing Kemi to sleep in her home when Kemi had forgotten her own house keys. She wouldn't see Kemi sleeping on the streets alone in the dark. Despite Anne not really fitting the profile of people that Kemi wanted to target, she wasn't wealthy by any means. It's believed that Kemi had targeted Anne and used her as nothing but a practice run. Kemi Adeola would be arrested and charged with the murder of Anne Mendel. Her trial began in 2008, where a then 18-year-old Kemi would be found guilty of murder and handed a sentence of life imprisonment with a minimum of 20 years to serve. The judge presiding over this case described Kemi as a, quote, remorseless, cold-blooded killer who was a danger to the public. In October 2023, it was recommended that Kemi be moved to an open prison, and it's possible that now in her late 30s, Kemi could be released from prison this year if she hasn't already been released.
If I go missing after making this video, just know that it wasn't by my own doing. There's something horrific that has been and is currently going on in Utah involving a ritualistic sex ring, and it involves some pretty high-profile people. So in 2022, the Utah County Sheriff's Office announced that it was investigating a ritualistic sex ring that dates back to 1990. A bunch of old records were recently released by the Provo Police Department in which a woman who has not been publicly identified claimed that she was ritualistically abused as a child by a Utah therapist named David Hamblin. This all took place in the 90s, and back then, David was working as a psychologist. The woman goes on to describe in graphic detail the ritualistic sex abuse that she experienced, as well as human sacrifices and a cannibalism cult that she firsthand witnessed. But that is not the only thing that the 151-page report uncovered. What's shocking is what came out because of the sheriff's office announcing this ritualistic investigation. David Levitt, who is a high-profile Utah County attorney, willingly and very publicly came forward without even being named and named himself a suspect in this investigation in late 2022. In a news conference, he said that there are leaked documents connecting him and his wife to allegations of cannibalism and murdering children. But he kind of chalked this up as a political ploy to get him out of office. But there's some pretty damning evidence that might prove otherwise. In the report, the unnamed woman accused David Levitt of sex abuse and participating in a ritualistic killing along with David Hamblin, the therapist. While denying this, David admitted to having a personal connection to David Hamblin. He said that David Hamblin was his elders quorum president in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and he was also his neighbor. David admitted to having a family connection with him. David Hamblin was actually arrested in 1999 for abusing the unnamed woman as a child, but charges were ultimately dropped for that in 2014. But yet another victim came forward detailing the ritualistic abuse he suffered at the hands of David Hamblin as well. The victim, whose name is Brett, stated that he began seeing David Hamblin as a therapist in the 90s when he came back from his mission. Brett said that he was struggling internally because he is gay, which at least back in the day, if not still, is opposed by the religion and the church. Brett came out to his bishop, who referred him to David because David had a history of quote-unquote curing people of their homosexuality. Each session, David would expose Brett to hypnosis therapy, and he even diagnosed him with multiple personality disorder as a result of experiencing ritualistic sex abuse as a child. This was really odd to Brett because he never remembered anything of the sort, but he went along with it because David was a licensed therapist. David would pretty much gaslight him into believing that he experienced these horrific things, but Brett became weary because he was never unconscious during any of the visits, and he surely never disclosed anything like this to David. This would continue on for 2 years, and on one occasion, David told Brett that as a child, his abusers tied him up in a black bag and left him there until he almost suffocated. And even though Brett really did not remember this happening, David said that they needed to reenact this in the office, which they ended up doing. This behavior would escalate until David reportedly made Brett expose his private area and perform sex acts on him in order to heal from his childhood trauma. Brett expressed not wanting to do this, but David said that if he didn't, he would never heal and always remain gay. After meeting with some of David's other patients, Brett and the others realized that they were all being put through the same abuse, and they never went back. Shortly after, David turned himself in and admitted to having intimate relations with his patients. He then gave up his psychologist license in 2000. He and his ex-wife are currently facing sexual assault charges from recent victims. The Utah County Sheriff's Office has interviewed more than 190 survivors of ritualistic abuse, and so much evidence has been discovered, including texts, phone calls, and emails. So you're probably asking how this all ties into today. Well, at the beginning of this year, the Utah state legislature moved forward with a bill that would criminalize the ritualistic abuse of children, now making it a second-degree felony. I live in Utah, and I had no idea how common ritualistic abuse is, or even what it was before reading these stories. I'm not a part of the church, so maybe I'm just living under a rock. But this bill would criminalize any of these horrific acts. Like, this includes sacrificing animals, mutilation of a corpse, ingesting human bones or blood, and making a child enter a coffin or an open grave containing a human corpse. This is all so twisted. Like, who thinks to do any of this stuff? I can't believe things like this actually happen. This stuff is straight out of nightmares.
Look at his face. Yeah, okay, that is the face of a guy claiming that he accidentally ended the life of his childhood best friend. 20-year-old Keely Bunker was born in Tamworth in England, and everyone who knew her described her as the kind of person that just radiated sunshine. She was kind, she was fun, she was smart. She also really made it a point in her life to prioritize the people that she cared about. And she adored kids, and she often talked about her future kids and how excited she was to become a mom one day. Keely also had the personality of someone who wants to make a positive impact on the world, so it comes to to no surprise that she decided to pursue a career as a teacher. And after getting her degree, Keely was able to get an interview to become an assistant teacher, and that interview was very important to her because it was the first step in securing her dream job. The interview was scheduled for September 19th of 2019. Her 20th birthday was September 7th. And even though she had this important interview coming up, Keely made plans with one of her closest friends to go out Wednesday, September 18th to celebrate her 20th birthday. The plan was that her and her best friend Monique were gonna go to a concert in Birmingham and then just see where the night took them afterwards. So they went. It was a blast for both of them. They had so much fun, and afterwards they decided they wanted to keep the fun going. So the two of them met up with 20-year-old Wesley Street. Wesley and Keely had known each other practically their entire lives, and it wasn't like they were the best of friends, but they were close because they had known each other for so long. So Keely thought that it would be fun if the three of them went out together. After the concert, the girls ended up at a place called Snobs. Then Wesley joins them and they hang out there for a few hours. There are Snapchat videos and it just looks like a group of friends, a little trio having fun. They're there until around 2:40 a.m. when they decide to call it a night. By 3:30 a.m., they all got dropped off right by Monique's place. Keely lived around a 20-minute walk away from Monique's place, so she tells her that she's just gonna walk home, but Monique tells her that she should just sleep over because it was late, it was dark, she didn't feel comfortable letting Keely walk home alone. But Keely is like, don't worry, I'm gonna be totally fine. I would rather go home, get a good night's sleep in my own bed to prep for my interview tomorrow. Monique did not love that, but Keely reassured her that she would be fine, especially because she had Wesley with her. She told Monique, don't worry, I've got Wes, he'll walk me back and it'll be fine. So they hugged, said their goodbyes, but that would be the last time that Monique would ever see her friend alive again. The next day, Monique wakes up and around 12:30 p.m. she texts Keely just to make sure that she got home safely, but she doesn't hear back. So she texts her again, but she still gets no response. But she's thinking, okay, she's probably just busy prepping for her interview. I'm sure she'll call me back when she gets a second. But Keely never made it to her interview. And that's when Monique knew that something bad had to have happened. So what does she do? Of course, she texts Wesley, given that the last time that she saw them, Wesley was supposed to be walking Keely home. And she's like, dude, what's going on? What happened? Where's Keely? Did she stay over at your place? And Wesley is like, oh no. He tells her that when they were walking home together, he started to feel really sick and they were pretty close to his house. So he decided to go inside of his house because he thought he was about to throw up, and he left Keely outside near a telephone box right by his house. After that, he just assumed that Keely ended up walking the rest of the way home by herself, but as we know, she never made it home. Monique then decides it's time to call Keely's parents, who confirmed that she never made it home the night prior. Her parents were under the impression that she probably had just spent the night over at Monique's house, but after finding out that no one knew where she was and no one had heard from her by 5:30 p.m. on September 19th of 2019, Keely's dad Christopher called the police to report his daughter a missing person. 1 hour later, Keely's friends, along with family members and authorities, had gathered together to begin looking for Keely. Meanwhile, another group of officers had been made aware that Wesley Street was the last known person to be with Keely, so they go and talk to him, and he tells them the same thing, that he last saw her and left her at that telephone box near his house, and officers ask him to ride with them for him to go show them the exact spot, which he does. He rides with them. He gets inside of the police car and directs them along the path that him and Keely had walked down as they were making their way home. He also points to the exact spot which he left her. And just from hearing that, you might think that Wesley was cooperating with the police, which I guess he was to an extent, but his reaction to no one being able to find his friend was the complete opposite that you would expect. Keely's parents were worried sick. Monique was also extremely worried, but Wesley, he seemed to be annoyed. He was acting like officers were bothering him when they were talking to him. He didn't seem concerned, didn't seem worried, had no sense of urgency. Instead, he felt ambushed and bothered. And he really did not like how much officers wanted to talk to him, because his reaction was like, whoa, you are coming on too strong. You are making me feel attacked. It sounds like you're blaming me in the disappearance of my friend. And I really don't appreciate you putting the blame on me. So like back off a little bit, even though Mr. Sir, you were the last person to be seen with her. What do you expect? Anyway, officers notice his weird behavior. They take note of that. They also take note of the little details that he just cannot seem to keep straight in his story. Nothing crazy, nothing too alarming, but just small little details that were different every single time that he told the story, which was weird. Back at the search party, it's nighttime now. It's dark outside, but the group is continuing to walk around and look for Keely or any sign of what may have happened to her. It was around 9 p.m. now. They had been walking around Wigington Park for about an hour and a half when one of the officers officers hears a devastating scream coming from Keely's uncle, Jason. Jason had been walking around when he noticed a tunnel, and it was right by like a creek, almost like a small stream of water. He looked closer and saw something red that was partially submerged under the water. Covered up with a lot of tree branches, the dress that Keely had been wearing the night prior was red, and as he got closer, he saw something reflect back on the light. It was a bracelet, and that bracelet was on a woman's body. Jason had just found the deceased body of his 20-year-old niece. And as soon as he realized what exactly it was that he was looking at, he let out a soul-crushing scream. 20-year-old Keely Bunker was deceased. She had marks all over her neck. I believe she suffered over 100 separate injuries. Her cause of death was ruled a strangulation. After the terrible discovery of her body, that other group of officers still had Wesley Street in the back of their patrol car, and by that point he was getting really uncomfortable, really annoyed. He started giving officers attitude, almost saying, "I feel like you're blaming me," and they were trying to explain to him that they weren't, that they just needed to talk to him because he was the last known person to be seen with Keely. But then they got news that Keely's body had been found and that she had been murdered, and with that, on top of Wesley's already weird behavior, authorities felt they had enough reasonable doubt to suspect him, and he quickly became their prime suspect. Just before 11 p.m., authorities arrested Wesley Street in suspicion of Keely's death. They booked him into the station where they sat him down and told him that it was time to come clean. They were hoping that he would confess, but even though he wasn't, the more and more evidence they got, the more sure they were that they had the right guy. Wesley was attempting to stick to a story that he left Keely alone at that telephone booth and had no idea what happened to her, but his phone records told a different story. Wesley's phone showed that on the night of Keely's death, his phone had been turned off, so they couldn't track his location that way between those hours. However, CCTV footage from areas surrounding Wigginton Park told them everything they needed to know, because on CCTV footage, you can see Wesley and Keely walking together near a clubhouse at that park around 4:20 a.m. They hug and then they move slightly out of a camera view, but on a different camera, you can then see Wesley walking home alone, and we now know that he had just brutally ended the life of his childhood best friend and then went home and went to bed. Just went home and went to bed as if nothing had happened. How people can do that is beyond me. The following day, again on CCTV footage, Wesley is seen returning back to the park to the scene of the crime, likely to get rid of any potential evidence and to try and hide Keely's body. And not only that, but his cell phone data then showed that he not only went back once to the scene of the crime, he returned back 6 times. And after searching more around the crime scene, authorities found Wesley's jacket and his bank card right near Keely's body. They also found Wesley's DNA on Keely, which confirmed what they were already suspecting, that she had been SA'd. So they confront him with this new information, and he changes his story again. His final story is that yes, the two of them had been at the park together and they had been playing around when he decides to give Keely a piggyback ride. He also says that they started getting really flirty and touchy with each other. In the middle of Keely jumping on his back, Wesley said that she fell off of him and hit her head on a post, which is when, according to him, she went out of it and she was hardly moving, only flickering her eyes. He claimed that he panicked, didn't know what to do, and just left her there, but he made sure to say over and over again that there was no SA at all whatsoever. But the results of Keely's autopsy completely went against Wesley's story. For one, there was SA, that was clear, so him trying to deny that was ridiculous. And secondly, there was nothing on her autopsy that showed that she hit her head against anything, so that was a lie. And as if things could not get any worse for Wesley, when authorities looked deeper into his past, they discovered that he had a history of SAing girls, once in 2015 against a 16-year-old girl, another one in 2017 against a 15-year-old girl, and another one in 2019 against a 20-year-old girl, yet he had not served time for any of them. Wesley Street was charged with the SA and the murder of his childhood friend, 20-year-old Keely Bunker. He was also thankfully charged in regards to the previous SA cases and reports made against him by the 3 other victims, totaling to 8 charges, and he pled guilty to every single one of them. At his trial, he maintained his innocence until eventually he confessed. However, he still claimed that it was an accident. He said that when they were getting flirty with each other, he, quote, accidentally killed her in a moment of passion, end quote. He then said that her body, quote, went floppy, end quote, and when he checked for a pulse, he couldn't find one. Then he panicked, he left, and went back to the scene of the crime 7 times to keep hiding her body better with tree branches. And as to why he didn't tell the truth from the very beginning, he says, quote, I didn't know how to act and explain to other people how she I felt embarrassed in myself and very scared to explain to the police, everyone, my mom and dad, end quote. It is highly believed by a lot of people, myself included, that what really happened is that he took her to that park with intentions of SAing her, and when she fought back, he ended her life and then put her body in that shallow creek and hid it, thinking that he would get away with it. Wesley Street was found guilty on all counts, and he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 30 years before he is eligible for parole. And I want to end this video by remembering 20-year-old Keely Bunker. She was a 20-year-old girl that was loved and adored by every single person in her life. A girl who had so much life left to live and someone who had such a bright future ahead of her. She's been described as someone who touched the hearts of the people closest to her. I can only hope that her family feels that justice has been served. That is all I have for today's video. Thank you guys for spending time with me today and for listening to Keely's story. I hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you. Also, real quick before I leave, new podcast episode is coming out today, so keep an eye out for that. Okay, love you guys.
She adopted this baby just so that she could torture her and take her life. Layla Marie Daniel was born on July 18th of 2013 to her parents Tessa and Anthony, and she also had an older sister named Millie, and they lived together in Hampton, Georgia. Her mother Tessa was known to be neglectful, and oftentimes she would leave the two girls unsupervised. Those two young girls were moved from house to house, living with other family members while their mother Tessa was out getting substances. By January of 2015, Tessa was arrested because of those substances and spent 3 months in jail. By April of 2015, Layla and Millie were removed from their mother's care and they were placed into foster care. When Tessa was a child, she was in the foster care system herself, and she was briefly living with a girl named Jennifer Rosenbaum. Jennifer, who was a third-year law student, was interning at the juvenile court, and that's how she found out that Tessa's two daughters were taken away from her and put into the foster system. Jennifer talks to Tessa's grandmother just to find out what had happened, and this is when she decides she wants to step in and help those girls out. Patricia Lambert, who was a foster mother for over 10 years, expressed to the Department of Child and Family Services that she was concerned that the Rosenbaums weren't watching the girls closely enough. Patricia told the Department of Child and Family Services that she found a bruise on Layla's leg, and when she asked Jennifer about it, Jennifer said that she got that bruise because she had gotten into a fight with another little girl at her daycare. As the process continued, Layla showed up with more bruises, but it was never reported because they didn't seem that serious. By October 19th of 2015, Layla had broke her leg and she was taken to an urgent care, and Jennifer told the staff that she broke her leg because she fell at her Nana's house as well as her gymnastics class. Samantha White, who was the caseworker, followed up with doctors to talk to them, and they basically said that Layla was going to be okay, and they believed the story that she broke her leg at gymnastics. However, Samantha did not follow up with a gymnastics gym to confirm that this was true. Samantha also didn't write an incident report for this injury, and every caseworker is required to do so. By November 2nd, Samantha paid a visit to the Rosenbaums, and that's when she noticed that Millie had a bruise on her face. Samantha wrote in her report it was a small bruise under her eye, and Jennifer explains that Millie was in the bathroom and Jennifer went to the other room to grab her phone, and when she had came back, Millie had hit her head on the faucet. When caseworkers are doing these home visits, they're supposed to undress the child to see if there are any signs of abuse, but Layla was asleep in her bed, so all she did was take off the covers a little bit, take a quick look, because Jennifer had told her that she was having a hard time falling asleep and she didn't really want her to bother her now that she was asleep. On November 17th of 2015, Jennifer would call 911 to report that Layla was unresponsive. She claimed that Layla choked on a piece of chicken, so she did the Heimlich. Then she started to do CPR and she successfully took out the chicken out of her throat, but that Layla wasn't getting any better. Once first responders arrived, they noticed that Layla had a bunch of other injuries that wouldn't be caused by doing CPR. First responders noticed bruising on her face, neck, back, abdomen, pelvis, wrists, and legs, and tried everything they could to try and save her life, but unfortunately on November 17th, she was pronounced dead. An autopsy was done on Layla's body, and it revealed that she had numerous bruises all the way from her head down to her legs, and she had the most prominent bruise on her back. In addition to that, Layla also had several broken ribs on the posterior side of her rib cage, not like in the front like you would expect from doing CPR. They also found several injuries to her internal organs, and her pancreas had burst so badly that it was split in half. The medical examiner revealed that there was no food in her system which could have caused the choking, and ultimately the cause of her death was blunt force trauma to her abdomen. And not only Layla, but Millie as well had extensive bruising on her hips, head, back, and arms. So by December 4th, both Jennifer and her husband Joseph were arrested. Even Millie testified in court that Jennifer and Joseph would yell at them loudly whenever they were mad. She claims that they would get hit and kicked for things like falling asleep in the car or not getting dressed fast enough. Millie also talked about the night that Millie had died, and she stated that after she was done with dinner, she went upstairs to watch Paw Patrol, and that Jennifer was at the bottom of the stairs and told her to come down, and when she went down, she saw that Layla was asleep. Immediately, she went into the car with Jennifer to go to the hospital, and that was the night that Layla had died. Jennifer and Joseph only had the girls for a few months until Layla was killed. Jennifer was given a life sentence plus 40 years, Joseph was given a 30-year sentence, and Millie is now in the care of an adoptive mother who loves and cares for her.
This is the story of Jarvis Butts. January 9th, 2024, 13-year-old Naziah Harris got off of her school bus at her normal bus stop that she gets off every day. But this day was different. Naziah never made it home this day. Naziah's grandmother, who had adopted Naziah at a very young age, is becoming worried. As hours pass, she hasn't heard from Naziah and she has no clue where she's at. But it wasn't until the next day when her grandmother decided to call the school police to tell them that Naziah didn't come home. Why you didn't call? You didn't call the Detroit police. You called the school police. The school police canvassed the school and where Naziah was dropped off at, but didn't see any sign of her. But they did get confirmation that Naziah was on the bus and she did get off at her regular stop. After that small ass attempt to find Naziah, they just wrote her off as a runaway when she had no prior history of running away. It wasn't until almost a month later when the school police decided to get the Detroit police involved. Note that it was the school police that contacted Detroit police, not Naziah's people. When the Detroit police took over, they did a more intensive search. They started around February 14th with plenty of volunteers. They even went as far as 45 minutes outside of Detroit. So they was hitting a lot of neighboring cities, but still turned up with nothing. February 24th, two of Naziah's family members who wanted to remain anonymous did an interview with Detroit Fox News saying that they thought that Naziah was being sexually abused way back in February of 2022. The family member also said that she had contacted CPS to make them aware of these allegations, but nothing ever came about. That's why the two family members were on the news doing this interview, because they had already distanced themselves from the family. They already knew something wasn't right. When the reporter asked how did she know this information, she said she got the information from Shannon. Now, who is Shannon? Shannon is Naziah's auntie. Shannon told the family members not to report it because she was going to report it herself. Who was she reporting on? Jarvis Butts, her boyfriend and baby daddy. I don't know how many kids they share together, but it's a lot of them. But Jarvis has 13 children by his damn self. Jarvis is a registered sex offender who did like 8 or 9 years for child molestation. Oh, and I just want to say, after that first family member contacted CPS and they didn't do anything, another family member contacted 2 months later, and CPS went out there to question them, but they said that, everything's fine here. Everything's fine. What is CPS good for? After finding out his history and hearing these allegations, the police started to focus on Jarvis. They asked him when was the last time he seen Naziah, and he said late December at her grandmother's house. Now, the police quickly found out this was a lie when they took Jarvis's phone and seen that him and Naziah was texting. When asked, why is Naziah's number saved in your phone, he said he didn't know. They asked him, were you supposed to meet up with her on January 9th? And he said, no, not at all. They seized his phone and he became the prime suspect. Now, on January 9th, they seen that Naziah was texting him asking him to be at the school at a certain time. And if you aren't going to be here at that time, I will wait for you. And she said, please let me know an answer so I can delete your number out of this school computer or laptop she was on. And Jarvis had text back, okay. Now, when the police tracked Jarvis's phone on the 9th, it pinged in Detroit, but traveled to Ypsilanti later that day. Now, that lined up with the witness that was in Ypsilanti, and she said that Jarvis and another mechanic came to work on her car that evening, and she saw Naziah sitting waiting in his truck, and he had introduced her as his niece. Jarvis's sister also told detectives that she seen Naziah on the 9th at the shop, but she didn't know who she was, and she didn't recognize her face again till she seen that she was missing. When they left Ypsilanti, his phone pinged back in Detroit at the auto shop, but that evening he checked into the Park Crest Hotel. He didn't check out until noon the next day. His phone then traveled to the River Rouge area. The police decided to check this area, and this is where they found pieces of clothing of Naziah's, her shoes. They found a jumpsuit. They found a black jacket. After a warrant was obtained for Jarvis's phone and Google searches, the police found out that he had been grooming Naziah since she was 11 years old. The text messages date back to 2022, but it was a text message in September of 2023 that led to her death. Naziah had texted Jarvis saying that she had missed her period and that she was scared, indicating that she was pregnant. She was literally begging for his help, a plan B, a pregnancy test, something. She even told Jarvis that, she didn't have no money for this. Jarvis's Google search showed between December 8th and December 11th of 2023, he searched Planned Parenthood, abortion pills, drinking red antifreeze, how to get rid of a baby. Even though Naziah was still missing, we had plenty of evidence. So the police decided to charge Javaris Butts with first-degree murder and child abuse. On September 26, 2024, he was arrested. Jarvis ended up pleading guilty on February 12, 2026, taking a plea deal, settling 6 separate cases. He was charged with second-degree murder involving 13-year-old Naziah Harris, who has still not been found, by the way, and multiple criminal sexual conduct involving 5 other victims ranging from 4 to 13 years old. 2 of them are rumored to be his own children. This is one of his daughters right here. I don't know if this is one of the daughters who was being abused, but this is one of his children. He was sentenced on March 12th, 2026 to 35 to 60 years. 35 years, then he'll be eligible for parole. I didn't really want to cover this case because it was so heavily covered. The only reason I would cover this case today is because this nigga died in his cell today. March 26, 2026. They found him dead. I remember watching this case in real time and just being so irritated by everybody. By everybody, because everybody knew. I remember the lives on Facebook they was having, going back and forth, just looking and sounding guilty and looking a mess. I was so irritated by this case because the whole time, everybody knew. Everybody knew. I know y'all remember this live. When they was on live on Facebook, they try to pretend like they was on the phone. They didn't want to answer no questions. Irritated. I was irritated. Rest in peace to Naziah Harris. I hate that his bitch ass didn't tell us where you were before he left, but get your rest, baby. Y'all throw one back with me. Rest in peace, bitch.